yaddle-dum-de-da, yaddle-diddle-dum-dee-diddle-dum, yaddle-diddle-dum-da, yaddle-diddle-dum-diddle-dum, yaddle-diddle-dum-de-da, yaddle-diddle-dum-dee-diddle-dum, doomed by sterling brick. The Wallace lay in hiding as the English host fae the sooth come riding loud the river forth. Tween them baith was roaring, rumbling at the sight. Oh, the brig is sterling, watching fae the wood. The Wallace and Dunmurray as the English come, the way the Earl of Surrey, aim by aim they crossed. Oh, the bridge was rumbling as they onward come. O'er the brig is sterling, the Wallace gave a shout. Who does men come running, stop the English host. At the brig is sterling, crashing on thundering. The brig was small and tumbling, Murray cutting down. On the brig is sterling, all the Englishmen ran into each other. None could turn about, none could give much further. Some fell o'er the side, in the fourth was drowned, and some were left to die. On the brig is sterling, yaddle-dum-dum-da, yaddle-dum-dee-diddle-dum, yaddle-dum-dee-da, yaddle-diddle-dum-dee-diddle-dum, yaddle-diddle-dum-da, yaddle-diddle-dum-diddle-dum, yaddle-diddle-dum-da, yaddle-diddle-dum-dee-diddle-dum. Sorry he was wild, couldn't afford, but ever wished me all his might that the brig was bigger than he rayed a wall. Loud the man was cursing, he'd lost all his men, and the brig is sterling, yaddle-dum-dum-da, yaddle-dum-dee-diddle-dum, yaddle-dum-dee-da, yaddle-diddle-dum-dee-diddle-dum, yaddle-diddle-dum-da, yaddle-diddle-dum-diddle-dum, yaddle-diddle-dum-dee-da, yaddle-diddle-dum-dee-diddle-dum, yaddle-dum-dum-da, yaddle-dum-dee-diddle-dum, yaddle-dum-dee-da, yaddle-diddle-dum-dee-diddle-dum, yaddle-diddle-dum-da, yaddle-diddle-dum-diddle-dum, yaddle-diddle-dum-dee-da, yaddle-diddle-dum-dee-diddle-dum, yaddle-diddle-dum-da.
This is Melissa, and today is the 3rd of March, 2024. I hope that you are all well, and that the feedback that I hear in my ear as I'm speaking isn't coming through on the recording. I did test a little bit, and it seems okay, but unfortunately, an old laptop that I used to record audio on died last week, just moments before I was due to record with Johnny on Dynamic Independence, so that didn't happen. And I do have a newer, really good desktop that I hadn't been using for the recordings, and so I'm just getting that set up, and things are a little bit different, and I hope it turns out okay. I did rescue the hard drive on the laptop, and that was the main thing, so that's good, and that is the way of equipment. This last period of time that I've been away from my routine has been good. In many ways, a blessing that Diana, my friend, was able to come here and help me, and I have just enjoyed really getting to know her and spending time with her, but also we just did this mammoth project that was huge physical work, day in and day out for 2 solid weeks of going through parents' things, getting those hauled out and just keeping what needed to be kept, and then bringing my own things in from the shed and settling into a livable situation, because I had been years in a situation that was just not great. And that was good. It feels really good now in this space. I feel that there are things I'll be able to accomplish because it's not so chaotic. I had spent the month prior to her getting here really going through my parents' things that I knew she wouldn't be able to make decisions about. So it wasn't just the heavy lifting, but she had a lot of creative input as to how things could work better. So I really appreciated that. This last period of time, it was a mixed bag. Sadly, a cousin of mine passed away, and she and I had been planning a reunion for our generation. And we had wanted to do that before Christmas, and she wanted to push it closer to Thanksgiving because she wanted, she felt her mother's health was really failing and wanted to combine, her mother's birthday and all that with the reunion. But unfortunately, my mother's side of the family, there are some heart issues that seem to trouble quite a few of us. And knock wood, I seem to have a good, strong heart. But my cousin passed away about 2.5 weeks ago after having surgery that went well, but when they were transferring her after a month in intensive care, they were to send her into long-term care, and she coded on the way. And so that's a sad loss for the family, and that happened. But it brings to mind something that I have thought about a lot since Alan passed away, and we're coming up on that anniversary tomorrow, 3 years since he is gone. And just last week, someone shared, it's really kind of a proverb, but out of the Psalms in the Christian Bible. And there's a whole section there on the anger and the wrath of God, and that was one thing that Alan commented from time to time, that sometimes it felt like the God of the Old Testament and the God of the New were different, but it's just that the New Testament is also called the Good News. So this proverb is, teach us to number our days that we may gain a heart of wisdom. And in many ways that has been with me on my mind since Alan's passing, that I never want to lose that immediate sensation of the temporal nature of life, that it is short and at any moment can end. And so with dedication and commitment, we do the best that we can in every single moment. But Alan wasn't big on anniversaries or celebrations of birthdays or anything like that. We celebrated Christmas. He thought was worth celebrating that birth. But I would sneak in things like just special food on his birthday, which I'm not going to share the date with you because he never did so. But I would make something, and from time to time, like a meat pie or just, something that I thought he would like. And one year I thought, well, he's Scottish and I've never made scones. I'll make some scones. So I did, and then I served them to him with some tea, and he ate the first one. He said, well, that's good. What is it? I said, well, it's a scone. He said, oh, it's not a scone. It was good, but it's not a scone. I think I got better at scones, but there you go. So it's cleaning out, making a space has been a bittersweet time because there's a lot of thinking about Alan and loss and missing him. And yet, with me always is that he's here. And I qualify that as that, no, I don't do a seance or have a medium or try to summon him down. He's not here in the room that I can see him. But I know what he would think about what I say or what I do. I know what he would say or how he would react in any given situation. And so he is very much really here with me. But I do think about life after death. And I do think about meaning and purpose and what we're here for. And I know that in Alan's books, and I've mentioned this before, he said the questions about eternal life were answered eons ago. We have a priesthood who wants to occlude truth from us. That is the evil nature of the work. And for me, the good news is there is something beyond here. So I've been thinking about things like that. Alan told me one time about when he was a teenager. I'm not sure how old he would have been, but I think, according to the elements of the story, that he was 16 and maybe headed towards 17, but I think he was about 16, and he had a friend who was experiencing a number of very uncomfortable paranormal activities in his home, and not just in his home, but that seemed to follow him, but primarily much of the activity was happening in this young man's bedroom. And he took Alan over there, and sure enough, things manifested. And Alan's he wasn't one that was given to exaggeration or saying something that, and as he says in this talk that I'm going to put up today, an untruth. And he saw a chair just fly around the room, and paintings or, pictures that were hung on the wall just drop down off the wall onto the ground, and some violent activity like you'd see in a Hollywood movie. He and his friend had sought answers for what was going on. They had gone to see a Catholic priest, and they didn't get any help there. They told him what was going on, and, Alan relayed the story to me in great detail, and it took him about half an hour to tell it, and I won't give you all of the details, but to say that after weeks and weeks and weeks of these phenomena happening, Alan and his friend ended up, they found, through the advice that they sought, a Christian spiritualist pastor, and they went to visit him. And this pastor didn't try to summon any spirits or, bring them in contact with the dead or anything, but he just had a very unique way of viewing the world, which Alan said was very much grounded in Christianity. And I say that because when you look up spiritualism or Christian spiritualism, you will find it asserted that these two are antithetical. And Alan, of course, knew that, and he wasn't making a judgment about it. He simply said that this particular minister was very helpful to them. And he prayed with Alan and his friend and gave them some advice of things to do that mostly involved prayer. And the minister did end up coming to the young man's home, into the room, and praying. And it was not an exorcism that he held, but it was really just blessing the room and the young man. And these manifestations, these paranormal manifestations, ceased. Interestingly, Alan told me that later, much later, after the paranormal activity had ceased, the young man discovered that his ex-girlfriend, they had broken up, and he discovered later that she had become a witch. I mean, there's no other way to say it. She and her teenage friends had formed a coven. They had researched this, so she was into Wicca. And the girlfriend had put a series of curses on him. This came out later. And Alan, ultimately his friend didn't particularly come to a good end. He got involved in drugs and alcohol, and those seemed to be separate choices, that, independent of the curses that his witch girlfriend put on him. But Anyway, I say all of this because nothing in life is really what we think it is at a glance. We uncover more and more. And another thing, that Alan was fond of pointing out to me was that Arthur Conan Doyle, who created the Sherlock Holmes character, was also into spiritualism. And he, if you read it from a Catholic point of view, because he was raised Catholic, they feel very sorry for him that he broke away from the faith of Catholicism into this. He seemed to gravitate towards this back in the 1880s. He became a member of the British Society for Psychical Research, and I've mentioned before that, interestingly, Arthur Balfour was also a member of that group. This seemed to be kind of the trend, something that people were into at the time, but one thing that Alan pointed out was that even though he was already involved in this, Doyle, he lost his son during World War I, and that really seemed to up his involvement in this and his sense of urgency that he would talk to people about life after death and spirits. Alan, again, with his characteristic, I don't want to say it was non-judgmental, but Alan's characteristic, let's examine this, let's take a look at what we're seeing, and let's not just shut it down out of hand. He said World War I was a horror that had never been seen before. And the loss of life was so monumental and profound across many, many countries, and people who had had traditional religion for generations felt that everything that they believed, everything that they had been taught, was either wrong or not complete, not satisfying. And many people did turn to other ways of thinking because they felt that their own institutions had failed them in a huge way. And it's been said by more than one thinker and writer. I believe even Peter Hitchens said that the loss of faith after World War I in Britain was profound and pronounced. War is a horror that is hard to explain in purely human terms, particularly the wars that we've seen in the 20th century into the 21st. Even when you know the players and you know the planning and the intergenerational planning, it's hard to arrive at and sit with a purely intergenerational planning explanation for the horrific things that we have witnessed. Another thing that Alan would joke with me about from time to time, and it was a joke, but the way that he said it was, that they say when there's truth behind the joke. And I would say, I won't want to go on without you, And he told me that in India there was a tradition, there had been a tradition when the head of the household, when the man passed away, that a funeral pyre would be built and for him to be burned upon, and that his wife would, I guess, be burned alive on that pyre. And I mean, I'm sorry to laugh at that, but the joke that Alan would make was that that's what could happen with me, therefore I could go on with him. And he didn't seem to think that was a bad idea. I kind of understood that, I did. I've understood that increasingly over the last few years, because loss is sometimes inexplicable, and contrary to what many people will say about the process, particularly when you don't sit with common ways of thinking and you aren't trying to adapt yourself to the status quo in the way society says that you should be or says that you should think. In other words, when you don't think it's just the greatest thing that you should be adjusted to this system and this world. Well, my own experience of sitting just outside the system seemed to be a growing estrangement from life. And I received a letter, I just mentioned him on the Real History that I did with Diana, from a long-time listener named Prince. And he said, this was in the fall when I was having the skin cancer issue. He said, Melissa, I'm sorry to hear you're not feeling well. Please get better, take care of yourself, chill out, be your own champion. You have much more work to do. This is an endless battle, life, and the battle doesn't end here. Alan gave many, many talks on who and what we are battling with. He gave us bottom line, some of the talks, and he went on to list a few of them, and I think I'll probably just put those up in the video there. Maybe half a dozen talks there. He said there are many more. Bottom line. So the bottom line, who and what are we battling? And I later talked to Prince, and he was giving me the same kind of encouragement. You know, you have work to do. And I remember saying something, I don't remember exactly what I said, but the effect was, I don't care. It was kind of my funeral pyre moment. And Prince said, well, that's up to you. But I do think that you have work to do. And so the last few weeks, you know, that is my coming to terms with, yes, I do have work to do. I didn't get the funeral pyre. I am here. And that sense of loss, as much as Alan is always in the room with me, always in my head, that loss is real. It doesn't go away, and it really doesn't get better. It's just there. But Alan was fond of talking to me about, yes, for some, based on the choices that are made in this life, there is something beyond.
Oh, whither away, my bonny maid? Sae late and sae far in the gloaming, the mist gathers grey o'er moorland and brae. Oh, whither sae far are ye roaming? Oh, ye'll take the high road and I'll take the low. I'll be in Scotland a-floating, for me and my true love will never meet again by the bonny, bonny banks of Loch Lomond. I trusted my ain love last night in the broom. My Donald loves me sae dearly, for the morrow he will march for Edinburgh too. Tae fag for his king and Prince Charlie. Oh, ill may I weep for yestreen in my sleep. We stood bride and bridegroom together, but his arms and his breath were as cold as the death, and his head's blood ran red in the heather. Oh, ye'll take the high road and I'll take the low. I'll be in Scotland a 40. For me and my true love will never meet again by the bonny, bonny banks of Loch Lomond. As dauntless in battle, as tender in love, he'd yield ne'er a foot to the foeman, but never again frae the field o' the slain. To his Myra will he come by Loch Lomond. The thistle may bloom, the king hae his aim, and fond lovers will meet in the gloaming, and me and my true love will yet meet again, far above the bonny banks o' Loch Lomond. Oh, you'll take the high road and I'll take the low. I'll be in Scotland a 40. For me and my true love will never meet again by the bonny, bonny banks o' Loch Lomond.
I like coincidences. I like it when something I'm reading or thinking about dovetails with something else. And I had this little thing from Isaiah that I had found amongst my mother's possessions. It said, "But those who trust the Lord will find new strength. They will be strong like eagles soaring upward on wings. They will walk and run without getting tired." So I had been thinking about that for several weeks since I found it. And in moving things around and settling in and making my space make sense, be more organized, and just going through things, and everything had to be checked, every pocket, every nook and cranny. What am I looking at? What do I find? And Alan was one for notebooks, but he was also one for scraps of paper. And if a little snippet, a thought, a poem, a stanza popped into his head, that might be on a scrap of paper. And here's one I found just last week. Faith held my heart, whilst doubt clawed and tore. Faith was the freedom by which eagles did soar. Whilst death mocked, fool, alone you will die. But I knew death was promise, life was the lie. And that's it. I thought the last line may be the most profound thing I've ever read. It's beautiful. But I knew death was promise, life was the lie. And he used that word faith twice. I think about faith and the way that people talk about faith as being belief. Like, oh, I just choose to believe that. You can believe in fairies, as Arthur Conan Doyle did. You can believe in anything. You can believe anything. But what do you know? What is a fact? What is a fact to you? And another thing about Alan was it only had to make sense to you. Another way of defining faith is not just a belief or belief with strong conviction, but a complete trust. That means if you have complete trust, then you know. And I always thought that was how Alan viewed faith. You know. Purpose comes with not getting on the funeral pyre and I'm still here and what am I supposed to do? Well, I've had this break from routine and I know that there are many things that I need to do, that I want to do, and I feel that this reorganization is going to bring me to a higher level of production, in part because there are listeners amongst you who also have projects and things that you're doing, and I'm going to be sure to allow time to whatever that needs. Is it encouragement? Is it help? Is it the promotion of something that you're working on that you want to share with other listeners? So your support will continue to be important and necessary, and your support it's not necessarily financial support. It can also be the things that you decide to take on as you get a conviction that there is something that you can do to share your knowledge with other people. That, I think, probably concludes the thoughtful portion of what I had to say today. The talk that I chose to go up is the first portion of a talk that Alan gave on November 8, 2020. And I'm going to say right here, this is not for YouTube/Google. So I'm not even sure I can give you 5 minutes of this talk. Not, as I've said before, not every talk is right for every venue. So please, if you're a subscriber to that channel, look elsewhere for this content. This was almost a 6-hour talk that Alan gave. Here's the poem that went with it. Farm for sale. Witness crumbling of empire, tired and spent. Military might overextended across the world. Floating people ask where the power all went, since the flag still flutters free, unfurled. Martial tunes and songs still sound the same, yet cohesive unity is frayed and fragmented. Floating people are programmed. Who to blame? Internal fury and rage from the discontented. And here's the parenthetical at the end of that poem. Floating people. Those who live in superficial reality, never diving beneath waves of consciousness to find the beast, which, with every calculated movement of its mind and body, causes ripples and currents which move all predetermined changes in human affairs. It's a good talk. It's a long talk, and I am not quite sure where I'll be cutting this first segment. There is a lot in the first hour that I like, even though at the end of the first hour, Alan said, well, I've been talking an hour and I haven't even started. He talked about Plato, and he talked about tyranny and tyrannical leaders and how they're supplied and when they're supplied, and the excuse under which we're here to help you, we're here to save you. I remember that I got into a very heated discussion that turned so heated that my boss had to interrupt it and pull me apart from a coworker, because right after 9/11, I flew somewhere, and when I got back to the office, I remarked that the only time I had seen armed military at an airport was in a communist country, and my coworker was, well, they have to do something, these terrorists, these Arabs, and it just got heated, because he took the position, we're in the dialectic, right? So his position in the dialectic was that we must give up some rights in order to be safe and secure. And my position on the dialectic was I'd rather die than give up freedom. So here we are, we're playing our parts in the dialectic, and it got quite heated. And that was before I had heard of Alan Watt and knew even what the dialectic was. We are known, we are studied, and we are played for fools. So in the news today, to go along with this talk, the first thing I noticed is that there's a trend towards shorter winters. Oh dear, climate change. We'll mention briefly before I get into some of the articles that I had been completely away from the book club and the book club chat. And I'll say Adam and David are planning on recording something on this segment called the Buffer Fringe, but they're both a bit behind on their reading and just have scheduling issues, etc. So it'll probably be mid-month before their recording happens. There is something that Alan said about Quigley in this talk, but there was somebody else that he mentioned in this segment that I'm going to put up, and it reminded me of some reading in the Buffer Fringe that I had discovered. And I think I may just post a little comment in the chat section there, a little voice message for the people who are on Telegram in the chat, and I may post it elsewhere, but it won't be too long because, as Darren and I said, Adam and David, fortunately, are doing the heavy lifting on this one. But the one aside that I wanted to say about book club and that chat is that there has been an enormous amount of really good and useful and interesting things that have been posted in the nearly 3 weeks that I've been away. And a couple of things that I wanted to point out are, there were some bits there. One person had posted a video. This was, it's leaving my head right now who the British, I'm just going to look it up really quick here. UK column. Sorry, Brian Garish. So Brian Garish was speaking with someone named Justin Walker, who was telling the story of the Bradbury pound and fraudulent banking. And I thought that was a really interesting thing. Again, what I'm saying is that there's a lot of interesting back and forth on the Tragedy and Hope book club chat. And this was just one example of something that I found useful. And it reminded me of a documentary that Alan had posted years ago, and I'm also going to link to that, called O Canada, Our Bought and Sold Out Land. Because what Justin Walker was describing to Brian Garish about the Bradbury pound and about true wealth were similar issues that were brought up in the movie O Canada. I also want to say that when you talk about true wealth, because we're the money system, as Alan has pointed out forever, is based on a con. So it's really hard to talk about money in any way that isn't tainted, right? Another interesting thing that I saw in the book club chat was a clip where Elon Musk was talking about universal basic income. This is really good. It's worth hearing. One of the things that he said is it's inevitable. He's not necessarily saying it's a good thing, but it's inevitable. And because of robotics and AI, commodities are going to be so cheap that they'll be easily affordable for everyone. And I just want to say that's a lie. So there you go. But there was something in Zero Hedge about Musk and his latest thing, which is a breach of contract lawsuit regarding the, quote, foundational mission, end quote, of OpenAI. And the comments were what was most interesting here, because one commenter said, oh, Musk is just an actor, he's a player, etc., etc. And somebody else said, he's a financial genius, you deny that. And there's this back and forth. And it reminded me of something that Alan said in this talk, which is essentially, what level of corruption are we willing to tolerate? And so many of us at the bottom look up at those at the top and say, well, I would do that. Or for a billionaire, he's a pretty good guy. He's for free speech and blah, blah, blah. There cannot be a billionaire, a financial genius, or an actor who had everything given to him, who is not absolutely tainted, if not completely and vilely corrupted, by being a player in such a system. And that's the one thing Alan never lost sight of, was always pointing out. But we worship money, we worship those who have it, and there you go. Otherwise, in the news, I had read earlier in the week that Israel and Hamas were going to have a ceasefire, and then we've got the IDF open fire into the people who were clamoring for food supplies. One thing that I read about the food crisis, first of all, the head of the UN said that Gaza accounts for 80% of the 700,000 hungriest people in the world. We're talking about the humanitarian aid. It was interesting to me that one of the things that people were clamoring for was the flour, because they needed to bake bread. It's said that residents in northern Gaza say that they've taken to searching piles of rubble and garbage for anything to feed their children, who barely eat one meal a day. Many families have begun mixing animal and bird food with grain to bake bread. International aid officials say that they have encountered catastrophic hunger. This is such a colossal tragedy. Biden said that he thought that this latest, the IDF firing into the people who were there to get their food aid, would complicate ceasefire talks. And I just thought to myself, you think? Yeah, I would think that would make it more difficult. But so we're told, okay, so it didn't happen last week. They're still heading towards ceasefire talks. But ceasefire talks don't mean a cessation. It just means, okay, we're going to sit quiet here for a while. So Farm for Sale was the name of the title of Allen's poem. When you look up food shortages or farming, etc., anywhere you look in the world, whether it's Africa or Europe, there are many reasons given for potential food shortages or real-time food shortages. Every area has a different thing going on. Here in Texas, we are having wildfires, which they are saying are the worst in the state's history. This is from yesterday. It said, the largest wildfire in Texas history has devastated the state's agriculture, blazing through more than 1 million acres of land in the Panhandle, killing thousands of livestock, destroying crops, and gutting infrastructure. The agriculture industry, a big driver of the state's economy, was already facing pressures from prolonged and widespread drought that forced ranchers to manage smaller herds, contributing to a decrease in beef production nationally. The series of wildfires in the Panhandle this week is another blow as many ranchers tried to rebuild their herds and operations during the cooler months of the year. Over 85% of the state's cattle population is located on ranches in the Panhandle, according to the Texas Department of Agriculture. They don't know yet how many cattle were lost in the fires, a couple of human lives as well. But they do know that ranchers will face significant economic pressure from the damage. And we know that meatless future is one that is envisioned. Another thing that Allen talked about was the Great Reset. What is the Great Reset and how does it affect us? And I want you to just consider when you're listening to this section that though certain elements have calmed down or receded into the background since he recorded this in 2020, what was achieved, what Allen was talking about would be achieved in the minds of those who are implementing these great changes, this great reset. This has happened because one of the things that the collective we, let our rulers know clearly was that we are very willing to give up our rights for safety and security. This was not a dress rehearsal, although it could be considered a dress rehearsal for something even bigger. But it was actually real-time implementation of major changes. Another thing that I saw in the book club chat was a little snippet of Fink, who is the CEO of BlackRock, was talking about tokenization of financial assets as the next step. So that's an interesting bit that I will put up for you to look at. I'm also going to try to find something that I can supply a screenshot from the book club chat of an interview that someone named Greg Hunter did with Catherine Austin Fitts. And she's reiterating something that Allen said in this talk about slavery, as she is talking about tokens and a credit system. and the end of currency as we know it. So I think I've chatted quite long enough, and I'm sorry for that. You'll be interested in Alan's talk, and again, for those of you who are on channels where I cannot play much, if any, of his words, I do hope that you'll seek it out in other sources. And I just want to say that since I didn't get on the funeral pyre, I am here with a sense of loss that I know will always be with me. But it is true. I have work to do. I'm completely committed to it. All my work really is just pointing to Alan's work as the source of many profound explanations for the world that we live in and why it is the way that it is. So I hope you all have a good week, and I'll be back with you on Thursday talking to Elmer, who is from Norway, living in Thailand, and has made some documentary films and I've never spoken with him before, and I won't speak to him until I record this, but I know that he is an interesting fellow who communicated with Alan for a long time. So take a look at the website and all of the different links that I will post to go along with this section of Alan's talk. Thank you.
Hi folks. I'm Alan Watt, and this is Cutting Through the Matrix on the 8th of November 2020. And time, I just can't get over how time flies. I think, with me, anyway, it reminds me of school. School, I hated school. It was boring. And I think a lot of children thought the same way too. And so much of your history and all that was to do with another country that really did. And had nothing to do with you really, except you're in subjugation at one point. And I hate to even say country, because it's not a country. We're ruled by a central city called London, the city of London. And so was the rest of England too, and Wales and Northern Ireland. All ruled from this amazing sovereign city, with its own laws and regulations, and even the Queen supposedly has to get permission to go in to visit, because it's a sovereign power, with its Egyptian obelisk that was brought over there, planted beside the four main banks. But again, I was thinking there too, though, it's like school, right? Because on Friday, you felt great, because a school came out, and you'd rush off, you're home or somewhere, go out and play or whatever, and you had a whole, and those days too, remember, time lasted a long time, because so much that you saw was fascinating to you. You're constantly learning. Outside your school, that's where you did all your learning, really. And if you lived anywhere near the country, you can go into the country areas and climb trees or jump over little streams, and great fun, or go fishing, things like that. And the day would really take a long time to pass. So it was terrific. That's what life is supposed to be about. It was like that. But the thing is, you get Saturday, and it was still okay on Saturday. It was wonderful. And you get that little bit of trepidation when it was getting towards evening, and you think, oh, tomorrow's Sunday. That means the next day will be Monday. You're back at school. And sure enough, on Sunday, once again, it's a Sunday night there. You try and make that, you stretch out the hours as best before you fell asleep, because you knew when you woke up you'd have to go to school. And that's what it's like now, isn't it? To do with everything that happens. All pre-planned, of course. And you can see their old scripts already, which they had published years ago, and how they'd manage it all and all this kind of thing. And I always say you're living through a script anyway. This would be permanent, basically. It was written in stone. I said, it's chiseled in stone. Nothing's going to change it. The whole world is to be on board with it. And that's what's happening. Because this changed the world, isn't it? The Great Reset from Klaus Schwab at the World Economic Forum, who told us you'd be quite happy living with far less material goods and so on. They've already decided where they're going to take you. You understand? With the Great Reset. And they were giving us all the clues for years and years and years under the guise of climate change. And you've got to cut back and go into austerity. And I gave these talks years. It's like it's like repetition. It's all literally Groundhog Day over and over and over for me. Because the climate agreement, what they want to spew into it. And the terrifying things that, oh my God, the world will be dry as a bone by the year 2020. And we'd all be dying of thirst and so on. And of course, Al Gore and the rest of them would use these kind of statistics. And he said years ago too that eventually, I can't remember the year he said it would be, it was long past, but he said that the children will wonder what snow was. We had to tell them what snow was. They can't imagine it because there won't be no more snow. And I can tell you that's an untruth. That's the terms they use, the untruth, not lies. But because every winter here it's got heavier and heavier for the last few winters. In fact, there's no lack of snow anywhere. Not up here in Northern Ontario. But again, it's fantastic when you can get someone with a white, I don't know, with white coats on when they stand next to computers, you know. Because you're brainwashed to believe that's what the expert wears. And they'll stand there and tell you what the computer's spewed out and why you must follow. It's predictions. You see, it can't lie. As they have this little cheesy grin on their faces as they tell you. But that's what the kind of system we live in. It's corrupt. And the agenda, even for the climate change, was always to reduce the population numbers across on the world. And bring in, again, what Bertrand Russell and others would refer to sometimes as a technotronic society and a technocratic society. Technotronic, too, was a term that Brzezinski used, Zbigniew Brzezinski. The technotronic era, again, run by experts and all the high-tech wizardry. They could literally alter people's brainwave patterns, as he said in his book, Between Two Ages. And the chapter was called The Technotronic Era. So in the 1970s, when he wrote his book, the testing had already been done on a lot of the kind of standing wave and extremely low frequency technology. And they found that very low intensity signals would affect the human brain very, very efficiently. And he said they could actually make people alter their behavior through technotronic means and blanket the whole continents with these waves, eh? So they're being tested out in different areas and well understood. But you add that with a technocratic society where you've got people being told to obey. The true socialist kind of society, the kind of society that H.G. Wells and George Bernard Shaw envisaged, where you'd have a hierarchy of, again, specialists. You'll do away with religion and you do away with religious morality. Even the miniskirt, they came up with the idea, and the promotion of sexual promiscuity, which would lead to the dissolution of the family unit and the fallout for massive sexuality, with a loss of unwanted children or pregnancies. You would create an abortion industry, and that would tie right in with Julian Huxley's position at UNESCO, where he said we'd have to devalue people's ability to discern themselves as being the pinnacle of life on the planet, and take them off their pedestal and bring them down into the lower realms until human life itself is diminished. And that's what they did very efficiently. And during it all, the people, the youngsters, we all did it. They followed the changes step by step every few years, rapid succession. All went in through this whole system thinking it was their system, thinking the culture was theirs, thinking they were somehow at the cutting edge, and they were creating the sexual revolution. They feel, and they start the women's rights and so on. They very quickly morphed into abortion rights and so on. So step by step, they fulfilled the whole agenda that was written back in the 1940s, that Bertrand Russell touched upon. Quite fascinating, really, to me anyway, when you realize that's how the world is run. And we're still living through it. Things don't happen just by themselves on any level. Like Plato said, you can't allow it to happen spontaneously if it's not authorized, whatever change it might be. He said, in fact, Plato wanted even musicians, not just actors and playwrights and dramas to be licensed, but musicians as well. He said, because music can be, even then, could be used to stir the warlike abilities innate within, especially young males. So music had always been used for warlike purposes. It gets the blood up, and you get your happy warlike songs on the go, and away you go. But also, you could create discontent through anything that would attract the youth. It's hard to get the youth to sit and say, let's have here they are on a nice island, one of the Grecian islands, and there's a school of philosophy. And they get beautiful weather, right? You've got lovely blue skies, and that deep blue, greenish azure color, I guess they call it, of the sea, and a nice warm breeze, and you're having a great time yourself, if you're wealthy. And this is philosophy school, and your dad wants you to go there, you see, and he's paid this philosopher X amount of bucks because that's where school comes from. Is the word is from a Greek word meaning leisure. So you need leisure to go to school, because the rest of the folk were too busy keeping the wealthy elite in comfort, and so they didn't have time to go to school. But here you are, as I say, here's this philosophy school saying, yada yada yada, and let's don't just, what's the meaning of life, right? And then it breaks off into 1,000 different ideas, and everybody's arguing, and you get dialectics going and all that kind of stuff. And you could either sit there for all day waiting for it all, or have you heard someone playing a fancy little instrument, so maybe a harp, right? And singing some song that would get their foot tapping? Well, I guarantee you, any little boys and girls there would suddenly be over it, especially someone their own age. You see, it doesn't matter if someone's created them as an idol to follow, as they've always do in the music business. But as long as they think it's theirs, and they're talking about, yeah, we're going to have talking about our generation, right? And rebellion, and tapped in that. So sure, you can actually, so what they're going to choose, what they're going to do is to listen to some boring old philosopher, or go and listen to this guy singing about the injustices of life, and all the things he'd love to, and how angry he was because his hormones are jumping in, and he doesn't know how to control things, so he's angry about everything, and yada yada yada. And so they can all kind of relate to that, and away they go. Well, that technique's always been used, and Plato talked about it, that they should actually be licensed, because it's a dangerous thing to society, for the stability of society. Quite amazing, really, when you think about it. Even way back then, that Plato himself had to flee Greece in Athens. He had to flee for quite a few years after Socrates died. And Socrates was his mentor, and he was a mentor to quite a few philosophers, actually, and Aristotle too. But Socrates was often put across to the public as being someone that they just picked on. He was just too bright for them, and he had these outrageous ideas and so on, and blah blah blah. But it was much, and he was asked to drink the hemlock. That was his sentence. That was his punishment. Well, his punishment, actually, if you look into the records that they talked about, was that he himself was teaching people, or the students, to become almost like an army, for insurrection against their parents. Old techniques are still getting used today, in your face today, actually, very open. The students don't know it, but if anybody else outside is watching can see it. And so Socrates died, and Plato and a bunch of them fled. in case they got hunted down, because the ideas that had been taught and the techniques that had been taught of recruitment, training and so on were dangerous to the establishment of Greece at that time, or Athens. And when you think about it, I think that was probably a common thing that would happen in different countries, actually. The more advanced, the more it would happen at the time. But Plato did understand. That's why he talked about licensing afterwards when he came back and he got a good position of power himself. He understood that what he'd been taught himself, the power of art, music, some poetry, and stage plays. Fascinating stuff, really, when you think about it. So nothing really changes. It's very powerful tool. I can remember going to high school, and in the first week I was there, some of the younger teachers there, some of these guys were just before class started. There was two or three of them in the class, just meeting, I guess, before the bell went off. And we're all sitting there waiting for the bell to go off, but they were chatting about music at the time. And they were having a debate about who the best female vocalists were at the time and who was getting pushed. They were having a kind of little spat about who the best female vocalist was. But when I listened to them, it wasn't so much how good they were. It was they knew they were very left wing. And they knew that the techniques that were going to be pushed in the songs and had been put across in their songs were kind of revolutionary type songs. And they understood that they wanted to change everything, always for a socialist cause, supposedly for this equality idea, this strange idea of equality. That's never existed, even in the communist countries. But again, people who were that same age, they were the right age, young, they were teachers, and they still thought that everything was wrong, and no doubt a lot was wrong. But they didn't know the reasons for things all being wrong. They didn't know they themselves were getting programmed by a system that already controlled the culture industry. Very important. Like Gramsci said too. Gramsci was the communist who taught some of the big communists, actually. And he said, and communism really is very, very old, an old idea, especially the type that proliferated eventually in the 1800s, but it pre-existed for quite some time. But Gramsci said and wrote about it, how to take over cultures, very slowly, very Fabian in a sense, until the culture is yours. You see, you've conquered it without them even realizing it. And that's the most powerful one of all. Now, with all the universities you've got, and throughout the 20th century into the present century, teaching this kind of thing, and some of the higher courses too, they go into politics and social sciences, but they went into the Leninist idea and also the Marxist ideas and the helpers, and they were all cognizant of Gramsci's teachings, which mean that they understood. They obviously understood that a lot of what he had taught had already happened, and they were all for it, because the socialistic values or the Marxist values permeated all strata eventually of society. And eventually when the upper elite come down with it too, they pretty well won. That's when you see society breaking down, because the old values are things that kept folks strong and wary against outsiders or any philosophy coming in to destroy as a weapon of war. You'd spot them. Well, those folk were gone then. You see that their own offspring had become so softened that they now were defenseless as well. And that's what you're seeing across a lot of the US at the moment as well. And the folk don't know it. But it was well planned and orchestrated. But yeah, think about Plato at times. It's quite fascinating to look into the ancient times and realize that some of these schools were teaching the overthrow of the parents. And again, some of the schools that Socrates had and others once had too, and this kind of loose brotherhood, you might call it, were all teaching the same thing. They brought young females in too. Some of them became almost like agents of modern spy agencies. They literally were told how to seduce the older politicians, if you like, and an important nobility of ancient Greece, and maybe even get hitched up to them, but definitely to influence them into a certain direction. I mean, it's fascinating really to see how nefarious society has always been in a way, and the human mind, especially when it comes to power and politics, the human mind knows no bounds. But today you have corporations that are like countries. They are. And the corporations, unfortunately, also took over all businesses until they are the business, and the country is almost a tool for their labor and for their products, you know. That's how bad it is now with corporations. And I gave the talks many years ago on that too, when Quigley, by the way, gave lectures as well. I don't know if they're still out there, you can find them. But Carl Quigley, who was all for the agenda, he was an elitist himself, and he didn't believe in democracy for the people. And he was all for the CFR agenda, you know, the Council for Foreign Relations, and he was all for them creating wars to get their objectives achieved, you know. But Quigley did say in Tragedy and Hope, and other short notes he put out too, not that Tragedy and Hope's a short note, but he did say in it that the corporations eventually will be the governmental system of the world. And the CEOs of corporations, he says that it will be a new feudal system where the CEOs are the new feudal overlords over the peoples of the world. Well, if you look at Facebook and all the other social media platforms, and Google, from the beginning, as far as I was concerned, I didn't want a computer. I knew what they were going to be before. I even did talk shows at the time on radio where I did it, so I did it on my computer. And I said what it was for. I said, these things aren't spontaneous. It's not self-made people who come out and just have these big organizations. They're all fronts. That's how the world is really run. And I said, they'll be used against you eventually. And sure enough, that's what you've got. So Quigley's predictions came true because he was in the know of a lot of it too. He knew the folk who worked at ARPA that became DARPA, and he knew the high-tech experts and where they went to take the world. But he did say that, the feudal overlords would be the CEOs of corporations. And you think about it, you see, in a feudal system, you don't have democracy in a feudal system. It's a hierarchy of what used to be nobility at one time. And you'd have your reeve, you know, of a town or a little hamlet or whatever it happened to be. And you would have your sheriff as well. The sheriff is the shire reef. That's where it supposedly comes from. I got my doubts about that too. I think maybe it's partly true, but so you had a shire, and you had a reeve of the shire, and that became a sheriff, supposedly, as English started to change. But you also had that coming from their wars, I think, in the Crusades as well. As far as I can think, there's a crossover between the two cultures there when it comes to some of the namings of these places and these people and positions. But you're definitely witnessing an authoritarian system coming down the pike. And everybody I've mentioned before, from years ago, that were up there working and churning their books out at the CFR, it was a great source actually, because many of the members in the CFR have their books churned out. I'm sure they're ghostwritten, but they're written in the vein of how this person talks and their ideas and so on. That's how ghostwriters really work. And but they told you an awful lot of truth of where we're going to take the world. Some of the ones, actually, some of the best books were written during World War II by members that were traveling in the countries as they got so-called liberated. And before it too, that they met together in big panels in the US and in Britain on how to create a post-World War II society for Europe, European countries, and for Japan. And in the US, I think it was Hopkins that Roosevelt appointed to be in charge of a committee to create a post-World War II culture for Germany and Japan before the wars were finished. I mean, you understand that we get simplified histories in school, But it just starts, bad man starts war, good countries go and fight bad man, and then it's over at the end of it, and now you got another enemy by that time, in a Cold War. Very simplistic stuff. You don't realize the massive organizations that war helped to spring up. Again, something that Quigley related to as well. He mentioned that you can get more done in 5 years of war in a social change kind of system where folks simply obey, and naturally the rights are suspended in war. You're under War Powers Act, and you all pull together for the common good. We're all in it together. That term, all these slogans that churn out. And people put up with it, you see, rationing and everything else, and social changes to change society. And Quigley also said that it doesn't matter what side you're on, of combatants, you all change much the same, because you're adopting the same changes throughout the war in order to survive. So that's why they like war, you see, or the threat of war, or the threat of mass extinction, and that kind of thing, because you get so much done. And the World Economic Forum is doing exactly the same thing, as you well know, with its Great Reset. And all these organizations, none of which you get to vote for, the United Nations, as an example. And it goes on, this kind of system. So, yeah, you're living through a massive plan. I wasn't even planning to go here tonight, but there you go. It's just the way it happens as my thoughts start to take off by themselves. But you're living through agendas. The whole point is you're living through agendas. Things aren't just spontaneous. Some of these agendas take many years to plan, and further years to refine, and then more years to game it, to see if we do this, what would happen. And they go through all these different simulations of what might happen. They could throw it off and try to eliminate things that might interfere. All in the game stage, basically, and the debating stage before they introduce it. And that's why they don't really feel. That's also why you see that no country is backing off that signed on to the agreements with the WHO and the various agreements after the 2004. They all signed on to this, really their own national agreement. It's all the same agreement to do with dealing with pandemics and martial law type scenarios. I don't know about you, but I would never, ever vote for any government that did that to me. I don't care what excuse to give for it. Never. I would never do that. This is all managed fear and terror. And when you couple that, I'll touch on it tonight too, perhaps. If you couple that with incredible suicides rates going up and up and up, officially, and you're supposed to go through the hardships of the Great Reset, the stuff they've been talking about for years, that I was talking about for years, but they talked about the people aren't listening to us, and they aren't cutting back on their consumption and blah blah blah, and there's a lot more still eating meat and so on and so on. It's a huge agenda, a meatless society, long before they came upon the idea of doing away with animals altogether. They'd already planned a vegetarian type society. But again, it'd be mainly the vegetables owned and patented by the big genetically engineered companies, engineering, and the pesticide and herbicide industry, chemical industry. Because all these corporations survive on us. So it's much better and efficient to get the government to sign into law that you must eat their food, you see. History is such an awful liar, because you get authorized history, and everything's politicized for the present. So the topic suffragettes, a lot of whom, by the way, were from wealthy families of revolutionaries who went over to to Moscow after the Bolshevik Revolution, and that's you can actually trace some of them. But facts don't matter when you've got big agendas to carry out and so on. And most folks didn't have the votes. Even in the US, I've mentioned before, after the War of Independence, they had debates about that. They didn't even want to give them what they did give the people to vote, rights to vote. They still wanted it to be landowners, and then even then they argued about how much land you should own. They wanted big chunks of it. But so anyway, democracy, this idea of having, in the US, on paper, it was the first nation to give everyone rights on paper. But what's the point of having them if you don't stand up for them? Jefferson mentioned it a few times. And so did Franklin. What kind of government have you given us? He says, a republic if you can keep it. Bush Jr. said it too. Well, what about the Constitution? When they were signing the Patriot Act and so on. When he told them, you sign it to which I'm sure they're all quite happy to do, all the representatives sign it in the Congress without looking at it. He says, just sign it. If you won't be patriotic unless you just sign it. So if you actually want to look at it, you're not patriotic. So they all signed it. That's the official version, that goes down in the history. And you vote these prunes in. But Britain again is no better. It had all the, I've mentioned this before, just like today, if you look into all the demands that are tacked on to loans from the US government and the World Bank, all based in the US, I think. At least the groups involved in them. And you look at all what they demand to do to change their cultures, which is the same as the West, you see, which has changed again. And before you get the culture and pass this law and change it here and change it there and all the rest of it, that never used to be done. At least we're told that anyway. But I think it's always been here. And today, look at the money that's been dished out to the people. And they're supposedly, governments are, they're supposedly borrowing, like from the Bank of England, billions of pounds. Millions then billions of pounds. Well, see, they're all with stipulations. And now that we're into the post-pretense democratic system in Britain, for instance, and in a lot of Europe, then you have all these different conditions on compliance. And the compliance are going to do electronic monitoring, passports, IDs, ID 2020 is one of them. And again, a post-democratic system where you obey experts continuously all through your life into an austerity type of living. It's all come to pass. They planned it this way. They wrote books and books and books about it. They taught it. And here you are. And Maurice Strong said it too, that he wouldn't be happy until they'd dismantled all the industrial factories and so on, and industry left in the West. He wouldn't be happy till it was all completely dismantled. Well, did anybody vote for Maurice Strong? Nope. Do you vote for the United Nations? Nope. Do you vote for the World Health Organization? Nope. Do you vote for the World Economic Forum? Nope. It gives you the Great Reset. And they say, nope. You don't get to vote for any of these organizations, but they, like one big gang at the top, because the members often are the same members that belong to all organizations, some of the top ones, you see. And they've decided with their massive think tanks and with their advice of their think tanks and so of the world and how it's to be, and it's the one that they want, with their smart cities, which they control, and everybody in it is controlled and actually owned by them. Because getting back to the money that the banks are supposedly dishing out to pay people to stay at home, it is a universal basic income, and along with it come all the conditions. Controlled and obedient to slaves. Go back in the ancient times and read about what slaves were, the ownership of slaves through debt. That's written down in the Old Testament too, if you care to read through it. If you go into debt, You have to give yourself your own body there as a servant, a slave, and work for the master until it's paid off. If you can pay it off, but with compound interest, you'll never pay it off. It's not meant to be paid off. But also, any children that you had while you're a slave belong to the master as well. It's quite amazing, this stuff. And people will get into arguments of who's to blame and blah, 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 and point fingers. But here's the reality of it. It wouldn't matter who's doing it, because it's all the same. You don't have to say your children will be mine because you're in debt. But the children will be theirs anyway, corporations and banks anyway, because your children are borrowing too, you see. And you're borrowing on behalf of the children. So all these stipulations coming down the pike. And a lot of young folk think it's going to be great. Well, we won't have to do any work, you know. We can sit and play with our phones all day. And whatever else they want to do. That's what they think, eh? Meanwhile, you have to go down into austerity. And I'm talking about radical austerity. Under the guise of saving the planet. Did you notice that as soon as Biden supposedly was in the lead, regardless of nefarious means and all the rest of it, it doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter. Immediately, all the different main media that was all for Biden, because deep state again, as they call it, you know, immediately started saying, "Oh, good, he'll get us back on track with the climate change agreements and back at the Paris Accord and the Conference of Parties will be meeting again, and they'll be cutting back on folks' ability to live in the country and all that kind of stuff, you know. All right back on track, this is what they're saying. That's what the CIA wanted, that's what the global intelligence agencies wanted, because they're all one. And that's what top corporations all want. They're on board with it completely. Again, CEOs of big corporations are the new feudal overlords. And just like feudal overlords, as I say, they can censor you until you can't say anything. They own everything, you see. So they are overlords. You can't use their platforms, you can't do this, you can't do that. If you speak out against anything that they deem taboo, and if not yet, they might declare some new thing taboo tomorrow. But you're not allowed to give your opinion on anything because you'd be called a social influencer. And only their own social influencers are allowed. To the big traditional corporations that have been living on the tax money for years, called news organizations, because no one was interested in the garbage they've been churning out for the last 30, 40 years. Really. Yeah. But they're vital to have a unified propaganda outlet with the same propaganda, unified news across the world. So whoever you look at, they get the same stories, saying the same things, with the same opinions, you see. That's how you control people. People can't think to themselves, they can't believe that anyone would go to this length to deceive them or control them. And that's why it works, is because you don't think that, because you're probably decent people, you see. But psychopaths have no problem doing that. Those folk who are bioethics, and in the bioethics field and the ethics field, the new ethics field for humanity, this replaces religion, you see. It's a mixture of law and social sciences mixed with corporate agendas. You know, there's just too many people. Why don't you just hit 65, die, don't claim any money that you've paid into for pensions, and let the government use that money on needful things, you see. Now, I'm not making this up. That came out from an Australian professor a few years back, who got all the coverage in the world, from all the Western media to, he actually said it. Of course he said it, because he was chosen to say it. That's how these things are put across to the general public. But, yeah, what you're living through right now is just the beginning of it all. Now remember, that's 1 hour past already, and I haven't even started. But go into cuttingthroughthematrix.com, my website. So anyway, as I say, don't forget you're not alone, and you can get in touch with me and so on. And even if I can get back to you, believe me, I read them all. And I know who is who. It's very important. And again, send me a buck or two here, cuttingthroughthematrix.com. Well, hopefully we'll keep going on for a bit longer, until they literally cut everything off, eh? Because there's no redress to anything anymore. Now, when you have overlords and warlords running all media organizations, social media and everything, but there's no court system here. You're going into the banana republic, eh? That's where we're going. And by intents, the planned post-democratic society. From myself, Alan Watchman, Ontario, Canada, it's good night. May your gods go with you.
O flower of Scotland, will we see your likes again, that fought and died for your way but hill and glen, and stood against him? Proud Edward's army, and sent him homeward, they think again. The hills are bare now, autumn leaves lie vacant still, o'er land that's been lost now, which those so dearly held had stood against him. Proud Edward's army, and sent him homeward, they think again. O flower of Scotland, will we see your likes again, that fought and died for your way but hill and glen, and stood against him? Proud Edward's army, and sent him homeward, they think again.